So the race is on for the heart of those conservative voters. And of course, that endorsement, if it does come from Rick Santorum, will be key for Mitt Romney, who has sputtered along trying to harness the interest of a lot of those supporters. Let me get you right down to the president, who is speaking live, as I said, in Boca Raton, pushing for what you see on your screen, the Buffett Rule, a tax they call for the millionaires and billionaires, a tax increase to 30% across the board. Have a listen.
Or are we better off when everybody gets a fair shot? And everybody does a fair share. And everybody plays by the same set of rules. That's what the debate in America is about right now. This is not just another run-of-the-mill, gab fest in Washington. This is the defining issue of our time. This is a make-or-break moment for the middle class and everybody who's aspiring to get into the middle class. And we've got two very different visions of our future. And the choice between them could not be clearer. Now keep in mind, I start from the belief that government cannot and should not try to solve every single problem that we've got. Government's not the answer to everything. My first job in Chicago, when I wasn't much older than most of you, was working with a group of Catholic churches on the south side of Chicago in low-income neighborhoods to try to figure out how could we improve the schools and how could we strengthen neighborhoods and strengthen families. And I saw that the work that some of these churches did more good for people in their communities than any government program could. In those same communities, I saw that no education policy, no matter how well crafted it is, no matter how well funded it is, can take the place of a parent's love and attention. And I also believe that since government is funded by you, that it has an obligation to be efficient and effective. And that's why we've eliminated dozens of programs that weren't working, announced hundreds of regulatory reforms to save businesses and taxpayers billions of dollars. We've put annual domestic spending on a path to become the smallest share of our economy since Eisenhower was in the White House, which is before I was born, much less you being born. I believe the free market is the greatest force for economic progress in human history. But here's the thing. I also agree with our first Republican president, a guy from my home state, a guy with a beard named Abraham Lincoln. And what Lincoln said was that through our government, we should do together what we cannot do as well for ourselves. That's the definition of a smart government. And that's the reason why we have a strong military, to keep us safe, because I suppose each of us could just, grab whatever's around the house and try to defend our country, but we do better when we do it together. And we've got the best military in the history of the world, with the greatest men and women in uniform. We pay for that. That's why we have public schools, to educate our children. If we didn't have public schools, there would still be some families who would do very well. They could afford private schools, or some would homeschool, but there'd be a lot of kids who would fall through the cracks. So we do that together. It's one of the reasons that we've laid down railroads and highways. We can't build a highway for ourselves. We got to get our neighbors and our friends to say, let's go build a road. That's why we supported the research and the technology that saved lives and created entire industries. The internet, GPS, all those things were created by us together, not by ourselves. It's the reason why we contribute to programs like Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and unemployment insurance. Because we understand that no matter how responsibly we live our lives, we know that eventually, we're going to get older. We know that at any point, one of us might face hard times or bad luck or a crippling illness or a layoff. And the idea that together we build this safety net, this base of support, that allows all of us to take risks and to try new things and maybe get a new job because we know that there's this base that we can rely on. So these investments in things like education and research and healthcare, they haven't been made as some grand scheme to redistribute wealth from one group to another. This is not some socialist dream. They have been made by Democrats and Republicans for generations because they benefit all of us and they lead to strong and durable economic growth. That's why we've made these investments. If you're here at FAU because you got financial aid or a student loan, a scholarship, which, by the way, was how I was able to help finance my college education. That's how Michelle got her college education. That doesn't just benefit you. It benefits whatever company might end up hiring you and profiting from your skills. If one of you goes on to become the next Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg, or one of you discovers the next medical breakthrough, think about all the people whose lives will be changed for the better. We made an investment in you, we'll get a return on the investment. When we guarantee basic security for the elderly or the sick or those who are actively looking for work, that doesn't make us weak. What makes us weak is when fewer Americans can afford to buy the products that businesses are selling. When fewer people are willing to take risks and start their new business because if it doesn't work out, they worry about feeding their families. What drags our entire economy down is when the benefits of economic growth and productivity go only to the few, which is what's been happening for over a decade now. And the gap between those at the very, very top and everybody else keeps growing wider and wider and wider and wider. In this country, prosperity has never trickled down from the wealthy few. Prosperity has always come from the bottom up, from a strong and growing middle class. That's how a generation who went to college on the GI Bill, including my grandfather, helped build the most prosperous economy that the world has ever known. That's why a CEO like Henry Ford made a point to pay his workers enough money so that they could buy the cars that they were building. Because he understood, look, there's no point in me having all this and then nobody can buy my cars. I've got to pay my workers enough so that they buy the cars, and that in turn creates more business and more prosperity for everybody. This is not about a few people doing well. We want people to do well. That's great. But it's about giving everybody the chance to do well. That's the essence of America. That's what the American dream's about. That's why immigrants have come to our shores, because the idea was, you know what, it doesn't matter what your name is, what you look like. You can be named Obama. You can still make it if you try. And yet, we keep on having the same argument with folks who don't seem to understand how it is that America got built. And let me just say, I mean, the folks that we have political arguments with, they're Americans who love their country. Democrats, Republicans, independents, everybody, we all love this country, but there is a fundamental difference in how we think we move this country forward. These folks, they keep telling us that if we just weaken regulations that keep our air or our water clean or protect our consumers, if we would just convert these investments that we're making through our government in education and research and health care, if we just turn those into tax cuts, especially for the wealthy, then somehow the economy is going to go stronger. That's the theory. And here's the news. We tried this for 8 years before I took office. We tried it. It's not like we didn't try it. At the beginning of the last decade, the wealthiest Americans got 2 huge tax cuts, 2001, 2003. Meanwhile, insurance companies, financial institutions, they were all allowed to write their own rules or find their way around rules. We were told the same thing we're being told now. This is going to lead to faster job growth. This is going to lead to greater prosperity for everybody. Guess what? It didn't. Yes, the rich got much richer. Corporations made big profits. But we also had the slowest job growth in half a century. The typical American family actually saw their incomes fall by about 6%, even though the economy was growing, because more and more of that growth was just going to a few, and the average middle-class American wasn't seeing it in their paychecks. Healthcare premiums skyrocketed. Financial institutions started making bets with other people's money that were reckless. And then our entire financial system almost collapsed. You remember that? It wasn't that long ago. I know you guys are young, but it was pretty recent. Now, some of you may be science majors in here. Usually, I like that. We need more scientists, need more engineers. Now, yeah, I was not a science major myself, but I enjoyed science when I was young. And if I recall correctly, if an experiment fails badly, you learn from that, right? I mean, sometimes you can learn from failure. That's part of the data that teaches you stuff, that expands our knowledge, but you don't then just keep on doing the same thing over and over again. You go back to the drawing board. You try something different. But that's not what's been happening with these folks in Washington. A lot of the folks who are peddling these same trickle-down theories, including members of Congress and some people who are running for a certain office right now who shall not be named, they're doubling down on these old broken down theories. Instead of moderating their views even slightly, instead of saying, you know what we did really didn't work and we almost had a second Great Depression and maybe we should try something different, they have doubled down. They proposed a budget that showers the wealthiest Americans with even more tax cuts and then pays for these tax cuts by gutting investments in education, in medical research, in clean energy, in health care. Now these are the facts. If the cuts they're proposing are spread out evenly across the budget, then 10 million college students, including some of you, would see your financial aid cut by an average of more than $1,000 each. Now, thousands of medical research grants for things like Alzheimer's and cancer and AIDS would be eliminated. Tens of thousands of researchers and students and teachers could lose their jobs. Our investments in clean energy that are making us less dependent on imported oil would be cut by nearly a fifth.